Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's monthly webinar. My name is Stella Park and I'll be your host today, while our presenter is going to be John Sue. In these monthly webinar series, you will learn from the best as our customer success team builds user-submitted forms. We're here to answer questions and educate you on the platform's capabilities. First off, I wanted to go over quickly the GoToWebinar control panel. The main thing you just want to focus on is the questions box, so please type in any questions you have as you follow along through the webinar. As we go on, it's important that all of you stay up to date and know what's going on at Zerion software. So what we have done here is given you 4 links that we think are really helpful for you to follow along with and be aware of all the activity. The first one we want to point to is the Cerium Blog, which has a couple of articles every week. Also, definitely join our community and see what's new and vote on some of these topics and see what's coming next to the platform. And the last 2 sections that we have here in the announcements are 2 channels we have dedicated to our engineering team as well as our customer success team. Finally, we have a variety of social media channels, and we would appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and share our posts on any one of these platforms. In particular, I do want to highlight our YouTube channel, where you're going to find videos of previous webinars, as well as short videos of building out different components of your forms and integrations that are available. I'm now going to hand over the webinar to John.
Thanks, Stella. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the September edition of our monthly form building webinar. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Before we get started in today's webinar, I do have a real quick announcement. I'm very excited to announce that we have a form builder certification coming up in October. And what we actually ended up doing is we're running a promotion on this certification. So if you've done a certification before, it's a really great way to understand and learn the fundamentals of form building that's going to tremendously improve your data collection experience. And so what we're doing now is if you go ahead and register for a form builder certification, you're able to bring a friend. So we're doing a buy one, get one free on those certification seats. If you've already purchased a certification seat, absolutely reach out to us and let us know if you have somebody else you'd like to bring along, and we'll be sure to take care of you in that respect. All right, moving on to this month's webinar. As Stella had announced, normally what we do on this webinar each month is we take community submitted forms and I go ahead and build them out for everybody so that we can see what it looks like to build a form and also see some of the different features that are available. Now this month we're going to do things a little bit differently. I selfishly decided to take this opportunity to actually share something that I've worked on very recently. For those of you who have been following the webinars for a while, last year around this same time actually, I presented a solution that I had built out as a nutrition tracker. I was trying out a different diet and I wanted to track my results, and so I built a form to collect the data, and then I had a small dashboard that was charting my progress. New year, new dashboard, new form. I went ahead and did a quick revision to that form, and what I've done for today's webinar is not only do I have this form built for you, I want to show you a couple of new features that are in a new release that we just had this past week. And in fact, actually, some of these features are going to be in an upcoming release. So I'm also showing you some coming up features that you'll be able to see. Now, the coolest part about this is if any of you all are into fitness and nutrition as well, just like every month, I'm going to be giving you all this form package to import into your own environment. And the way we built this form this month is actually going to allow you to use the form, use the dashboard, and be able to chart your own progress. So absolutely feel free to join in. The dashboard will only show your results, whatever you submit. And so that's one of the cooler features of what's going to be happening today. So this is my Health Tracker 2.0. As I said, in this form, we're going to actually be tracking a few different data points. And so I want to go over that first. What I decided to track in this version of my tracker is my sleep. I've also been doing what's called a ketogenic diet, and so I'm tracking my weight as well as I actually do blood draws. I'm kind of a bit of a nerd about this, but I'm not saying you all have to do that, but it's there for you on the form if you want to do it. But then I also have a really quick morning routine, a very short checklist of things that I like to try to do to keep myself honest and accountable. So we're going to be building all those out. We're also going to be going over a couple of new features, specifically new built-in functions, as well as the ability to dynamically populate attachment elements. So for those of you who don't know, the built-in functions are just variables that we have predefined inside of iFormBuilder. Some of the ones you may have used in the past are things like iFormBuilder.firstName, iFormBuilder.email, or maybe even iFormBuilder.username. We've added to those built-in functions now, and what we're able to do is use their server name, profile ID, page ID, and user ID. Now you may be asking why you would want these pieces of information. This was actually something that the customer success team requested internally, and then we've shared with everybody else in this release. These built-in functions are very, very useful if you are doing any sort of an integration with the platform and you need to use the API to build out your request URLs. So now what you're able to do is have a dynamic function that's going to grab the server name, the profile ID, the page ID, and you're able to use that and write a general function to do different things. So that's what we've been doing internally, is we've been taking our coding up to the next level, writing more general functions so that we can reuse them, and these built-in functions were a major part of that endeavor. The second new feature I mentioned was the ability to dynamically populate an attachment link. I'll show you what that means. What it's going to end up being functionally for you all is you're able to actually check the dashboard in iForm, which is really cool. So we're going to have a link to the dashboard. We're actually going to have a search parameter inside of that link, and so that you will only see your own results when you pull up that dashboard. So I'll go through that in a couple minutes when we actually start building. Now to get started, let's go ahead and jump over to my browser. I have my iFormBuilder control panel open right now. I also have the dashboard open here so you can see it real quickly. It's really nothing too fancy here. I just have a couple of like dials here for the number of days I've done my push-ups and my squats and my core exercises. And then I have a graph underneath for my sleep. So I wear a fitness tracker and it charts both my light sleep as well as my deep sleep. So I put those numbers into iForm each morning. I do a quick weight check, and then also I do, as I said, the blood draw for my glucose and my ketones. And we'll be going through all of those. I'll show you how to build out the form, and then again, form package at the end of the webinar for you all to join in as well. All right, let's go ahead and start by opening up the form builder. We are going to go ahead and create a new form. We're going to call this form fitness tracker. Actually, let's call this health tracker 2.0. Now, what I'm going to do is uncheck based on label. For the table name, I want to make this something that's a little bit more easy to type out. I don't like how the period has an underscore and things like that. So I'm just going to call this health tracker. And in fact, what I'm going to do is put the date here today, as I've done with all of the other webinars, so that I can keep my environment a little bit cleaner. Let's go ahead and create this form. And we'll start out here. Now, the first thing I want to do in this form is we're going to go ahead and use those built-in functions I had mentioned. So I'm going to go ahead and add in 4 read-only elements. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to save. Now I'm going to take you through my normal process. I tend to do this pretty frequently, is I will add elements in a chunk, save, and then go back and actually configure them. I find it's a little bit quicker this way. The first built-in function we're going to use is the server name. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this server name. And for the dynamic value, we're going to use the prefix iFormBuilder dot and then server, capital N, name. We're going to follow suit here with the next 3. This is going to be profile ID. And then this one is going to be page ID. And then the last one is going to be user ID. Now, as I fill these in for the dynamic value, I want to speak through user ID very briefly, because that's one that you may not be familiar with. So the user ID is going to be the actual numeric value assigned to each user. So every user actually has a username, which is the value you type in to log in, but there's also an ID associated with them in the database. And this would be similar to referring to somebody by their social security number. You're not going to memorize everybody's social security number. You have a name. But the user ID is how the API assigns records to users. It's how we reference users. And so before, what you would have to do is actually take the username and then find that username's associated ID, then use the ID in the next call. We've shortened that process now because you can access the ID directly. You don't need to do that lookup anymore. And so it's going to be less API calls. Your web services and your scripts are going to be more efficient. All right, so let me go ahead and finish these up. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And for the first time today, we're going to hop over to my device. Let me sync. It's going to download the form, and then we're going to take a look. Now I have 4 read-only elements here, so there's nothing to really enter in, but I just want to open up the form so we can see what these look like. You'll see that for the server name, it says app.iformbuilder.com. For my profile ID, I have that listed as well as the page ID, and then finally my user ID at the bottom also. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, go back to the form builder. Now, these are all read-onlys. There's nothing that we enter in, so there's no real reason to show them on the form. I'm going to set a quick condition value as false for all 4 of these. Now, your condition value is how you control the visibility of an element. Each condition value is going to be what's called an expression. An expression can either be true or false. So if it is true, then we'll show the element. If it's false, we'll hide it. And so the easiest way to always hide an element is to type in false in the condition value. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a date element here. I want to capture today's date. So we're going to go ahead and call this date. Now, if I were to try to type date down here and save this, you'll notice I get an error here. The word date is what's called a reserved word. These are words that have significance, whether it's in iFormBuilder, in JavaScript, or in MySQL, which is the backend database we use to store everything. The bottom line is you're not able to have a column named date by itself. And so that's why we get this error here. I want to show everybody this and demonstrate so that if this happens to you, you know what to do. What we're going to do is I'm going to change the name so it's more unique, and now I'll be able to save. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to default this to the current date for today because I don't want to have to scroll through my radial dial every single time. This should always default to today. In the event I miss logging a day, now I'll be able to go in there, make the change to that element, and then submit my record accordingly. Now the next thing I want to add to this is the elements needed to capture my sleep time. Now the way I've chosen to do this is I've chosen to use 4 range elements. So I'm going to actually add them all together, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me do a quick save like I normally do. And then I'm going to go into configuring these. Now the reason I chose to use range elements is because I find that it's a little bit faster for me to fill out my form when I don't have to enter in or manually type the numbers. Now I could use a counter element, but the range is a little bit faster for me. I like having everything in line on my form, not having a new window. So this is going to actually say my light sleep hours. And then the next thing I want to track are the minutes for this. So I've separated this data point out into 2 elements to make it a little bit easier for me to fill out. Now I could sleep anywhere between 0, and I'm just going to go ahead and put 8 in here. And then for the minutes, this should be 0 to 59, because anything higher than that would be a new hour. And we're going to do the same thing for my deep sleep. Let's say deep sleep hours, and the same thing for minutes. Okay, let's change this 0 to 59. And the hours, we will again do 0 to 8. Now I will say the first time I actually built this, I did not use range elements. I actually used a single number element to capture the minutes, and I found that it was a big pain for me to try to calculate those minutes each time. And so now I've gone ahead and done this. Let me go ahead and sync my device, and we'll take a look at my health tracker. You'll see I have the date defaulted to today, and then I'm able to go ahead and do this scrolling for the number of hours. So let's say I slept for 2.5 hours of light sleep, and again, this is coming off of my tracker. I'm not doing this myself, but I can choose something like this, and then that's how I would fill that out. Now we are going to want to do a quick calculation here. So the next thing we're going to do is actually add 2 read-only elements underneath this. Now the reason I have these read-only elements is because I'm going to want to report on the total amount of time. And in order to do that, we're going to convert all of this to minutes. So the first thing I want to do is figure out the total minutes for my light sleep. And this is going to be the combination of the hours and the minutes from the previous fields. So this is going to be my light sleep hours times 60 plus my light sleep minutes. Now, anytime you're working with calculations, I heavily recommend that you actually move at a much slower pace here. Before, I was adding 4 elements, changing 4 elements, and then saving in between. I'm going to do a single change. I'm going to check what I have here. The reason I recommend doing this is because the JavaScript engine, while it's very flexible and powerful, does require a little bit of tinkering. And so what I like to do is I like to check my results to make sure that I'm getting the intended results from one step at a time. Now here you'll notice I have a slight discrepancy. The number 247 is the total number of minutes it should be, but you'll see here I have 0 hours and 0 minutes. It doesn't make sense. So the next thing I normally do is I go ahead and actually try the elements. I want to see if this value is going to update. You'll notice here, it does update once I change this. Now what's happening, and I'm sure this has happened to some of you before, is we're actually running into what's called a caching error. iForm is trying to use the previous value stored for the calculation without the form being updated yet. To circumvent this, what we're going to do is we're going to set a default for these range elements. I want to default these to 0. So I want these to start at the value 0. Now, when I opened the form, you notice that they showed 0. However, the value stored behind the scenes was the value from the previous record. So now let's go ahead and check again. And while I am syncing and checking, Stella, I wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience or if there's anything I can go over again.
No, it looks like everyone's following along great.
Excellent. All right, so let's go ahead and see what we got here. Now you'll notice the light sleep number is correct. As I change this, it updates properly, so we're good to go. Let's go ahead and make the same change, and we're going to set up this read only. So this is going to be very similar. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste a bit. I will say copy and pasting saves a little bit of time, but it also tends to be a little bit more error prone. So just be careful when you do this. But I think we're good for now. All right, so I've got my deep sleep, I've got my light sleep, I have my built-in functions. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the fields for my glucose and my ketones. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly actually, because these fields are pretty straightforward. Now, one thing I did want to talk through is which element you want to use for numeric values. So I chose the range element before because I wanted to keep it on screen. I wanted to be able to fill it out quickly. Now decimals are another topic here, and this comes up pretty frequently. I have to do a number, like so my glucose number could be anywhere between 50 to 120. So you say, okay, well I'm going to use a number element. That makes sense. It's a numeric value. Same thing for the ketone number. Say it's a number. I'm going to use a number element. There is one thing I want to caution about this, and anytime you're working with decimals, and this is common to pretty much a lot of the programming languages kind of around the age of JavaScript, but you'll run into what's called a floating point number. And basically what happens is JavaScript does not store the actual discrete value, say 1.1. It stores an expression that evaluates to 1.1. The big takeaway here is that there are actually going to be some decimals that have trouble being represented and printed out. So your value may be 1.1, but what will be shown, displayed, and stored is going to be something like 1.1000001. And so because of this, if you're working with decimals and accuracy is going to be very important, I actually recommend using a text element to capture your numeric values. And that's what I'm going to be doing here today. And this was something that I learned through trial and error of the first form. So I'm going to add 2 elements. I'm going to capture my glucose, and we're going to do ketones as well. And I will say as a sidebar, if anybody is interested in this diet, I'll geek out with them for hours on this. It's something that I'm pretty interested in. But then we're going to do what's called a glucose ketone index. And so this is going to be our next calculation. Now for this calculation, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the glucose number, we're going to take the ketone number, we're going to divide them, and then we're going to divide by 18 again. So that's the calculation. So we would take your glucose number divided by 18, and then we're going to take that and divide it by the ketone number, and that should give us our calculation. Now let's take a look at what we get here. We're going to have to make some modifications. I'm letting you know ahead of time. I'm intentionally messing up here, so to speak. And again, the reason I'm doing this is to just model the normal form building behavior. I'm sure some of you have run into similar elements before. One of the purposes of this webinar is to teach you all how to overcome some of these challenges. Now you'll notice the number is messed up first of all, but the other thing is as I enter in values here, so let's say we'll do 77, and let's say I put in a 0 here, right? We're going to run into something like this. Your calculation is not going to work correctly. And so what we want to do is we want to be careful. We want to avoid two things. One, we want to avoid caching errors. And two, we want to avoid the calculation happening when we don't want it to actually happen. In order to do this, we're going to use what's called an if-else statement inside of our dynamic value. So basically, I only want this calculation here to happen when my glucose number is filled in, when my ketone number is filled in, and then both of them are greater than 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, I'm going to do 2 curly braces, and else, and 2 curly braces. Now the way this works is there's going to be an expression put inside of the parentheses. When it evaluates to be true, we're going to execute what's inside of this first set of curly braces. If it evaluates false, we'll go into the second set. So we want this to happen if glucose is greater than 0 and ketone is greater than 0. Then we're going to take this. I'm going to do a quick copy and paste here. Otherwise, what we want to do is just show this as being empty. Now make sure we have to default this value as well. So I'm going to do this. And I'm actually going to set these to be numeric fields as well so that I can change my keyboard. Another neat trick that you can do. So once I save this, I'm going to sync and check. Stella, real quickly wanted to check in. Any questions come through that I'd be able to answer?
No, but it's been answered already.
Oh, excellent. All right. Let's open this up, take a look at my health tracker, and you'll see, so right now the number's not showing up, which is great. We're going to adjust this number here, and now the number is still not going to show up. But once I fix this, let's say 1.8, now we get that glucose index to show properly. Now the last thing I want to do is show you guys a real quick trick here. Because I don't want that really long number, I'm actually going to take this value and I'm going to round it. I'm going to take this and I'm going to round it. I'm going to use the toFixed function, 2 decimal points. Now some of you may have had trouble with this in the past using toFixed. What's really important to know is that you have to supply this function a numeric input. The other thing that's important is the function returns a text output, and that's where most people run into a problem, is because they use a number field and they want to round it. The problem is then that number field cannot show a text return. So what you need to do is anytime you're rounding the value, please use a text element for the toFixed function.
Do you have a question?
Okay, Stella, we got a question?
Yeah, we have a question from Beth. Do you need the numeric function since the input fields are text?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I honestly, I've run into scenarios where sometimes I need it, it feels like, and sometimes I've gotten away with it. Beth, you caught me. I'm being a little bit lazy on the webinar today. If I wanted to be really, really explicit about my if statement, what I would actually be doing is I would make sure that this is a number. So I would say is NaN, right, equals false, and is NaN, which stands for not a number. All right, equals false. So I would check to make sure that it's not or that it is a numeric value. Then what I would be able to do is make sure that it's greater than 0. And then I'd be able to do the calculation. Now, the reason I don't need to typecast it into a number is because JavaScript is pretty good about knowing when to use which. The time you normally run into problems is if you're trying to add two values together. Because we're doing division here, JavaScript is dynamic enough, it's smart enough to know to recognize it as a number. But if I was adding two values together and I had text elements here, JavaScript would say, hey, we're trying to combine these two strings, and then it would just basically glue the numbers together. And that might be what you've been running into before. Let me go ahead and change this back. Actually, I can just leave it like this. This is good. So we're going to keep this the way it is. All right. Any other questions, Stella?
Nope, that's it for now.
All right. So now I've got a few more elements here I want to add very briefly. We're going to just do the quick checks for my morning exercises. This is really, really simple, guys. I'm just going to do 3 toggles. I don't do anything fancier than this. Again, I'm going to save. And for me personally, I happen to do push-ups, squats, and then I do some sort of a core exercise. So nothing more complicated than that. Very, very straightforward. Let's go ahead and take a look at what our form looks like up to this point. All right, so we'll see here I've got my sleep hours. I can go ahead and change these just to show the functionality of them. We'll go ahead and set these up here. I can do something like this, 86 and 2.1. And then these are just going to be simple checkboxes. So that's really all I do for my data collection here. I try to make it as simple as possible. I can go ahead and submit this. And so you'll see all I did was press done. I got the hourglass icon, and then I pulled down on my screen to start the sync process. Now, anytime I sync my device, 2 things are happening. The first thing is new forms are going to be downloaded, any changes are going to be downloaded. But then the other thing that happens is any records that are marked as complete are going to be uploaded, so sent to the server. All right, now that we've done that, my device is clear currently. I want to add the final part to this form, which is going to be the dynamic URL. I'm going to add an attachment element. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with this element, the attachment element is used normally to connect a PDF to the form. We have a lot of groups use this element to connect like an instruction manual or some sort of additional instructions for the user. And then what will happen is because everything is downloaded to the device, the PDF included, they can access that even when they're offline. Now we're using the attachment element for a slightly different reason here. Instead of supplying a URL to a static PDF, I'm actually going to be, supplying the URL to my dashboard here. Now I do want to say before I move forward anymore, this is going to require you to have a connection. Obviously, if you're offline, we are not going to be able to access this dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and save this real quickly. And I'm going to sync my device, and we're going to take a look at how this is. All right, so I'm going to open up my form. I'll be able to fill this out. And now let's say maybe what I want to do is I don't want to memorize that URL. So I have this at the bottom, and I can just press the dashboard, which is opening the attachment element. And what it should do here is load up my dashboard. And so you'll see the dashboard shows up in-app. This is a really nice way to check on my own results. And you'll be able to see I put in some dummy data prior to this webinar. And so you'll see that I have the graph I showed you earlier on my browser on my tablet now. And so that's a really nice way to do this. Now there's a couple of final things we need to do to connect all the dots together. Before I do that and wrap up the webinar, Stella, I want to check in again real quickly if there was anything regarding the form building that came up question-wise.
Nope, everything's good.
All right, excellent. So we have the form set up, Now, once the data is submitted, we have to send that data somewhere, okay? So iFormBuilder, my dashboard, they don't know to magically talk to one another. What I'm actually going to be doing here is I'm going to be opening up my Zerion console. I'm going to be going to my demo account. And I have what's called a data flow setup. And the data flow automation is one of the other services that we offer. And this is used for workflow management. It's used for post-processing. So after a record gets submitted, something happens. I'm going to open up my health tracker. This is what's called a webhook. This long URL is where I'm actually going to be sending my iFormBuilder records. So I'm going to copy this. In my form assignment is where I'm going to set up my endpoint. So let's find my form here, my health tracker. Down under post data, we're going to say new endpoint. I'm going to paste this guy in here. DFA demo, health tracker. This is just the way I like to keep track. I like to name everything so that it matches. So now what will happen is when I submit my form, the data is going to go to this webhook. Without getting too technical, basically all that will happen is from the webhook is going to send it to my reports dashboard, and then the reporting dashboard will update based on the information I submit. So to show you this all in action, let's go ahead and open up the health tracker. I'm going to set the date for tomorrow actually, just so that we can make sure to see the value reflected here. Let's say I slept a whole bunch tonight. I promise you I don't actually normally get that much sleep. We're going to set the glucose number. We're going to have a good day here. And then for ketones, we're going to have a really good day. So I'm going to have great numbers here. I'm going to add a few fields. I'm going to say I did all my exercises, press done. I'm going to sync my device. So again, what's happening is this record is going to be uploaded. It's going to be sent to the webhook, and then the data flow is going to process the actual data, sending it to reports. So you see all that happened. Over here, now you'll see I had 5 records before. Let me refresh this. And now you'll see 6. That last record is what we just uploaded, and it should have gone to reports. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to refresh this. And you'll see some of these numbers went up. You'll see I have a reading for tomorrow, which doesn't obviously make sense because it's still today, but that just shows you how this data is going to be updated. Now, let's say I've used this tracker for a while. I want to just see a segment of my information. I'm able to have a timeline filter, and you guys are going to be able to do this too. So I can say, I just want to see what values I have for today. Maybe I want to see just this week. But this is going to allow you to have a dynamic reporting solution with the information you upload. So there was one last feature I wanted to go through, and this was something that we actually had requested quite often. I missed it because it doesn't necessarily fit within the tracker, but I still want to demonstrate this. And what we're going to be going through is if you have a pick list and you have an other value, a lot of the times what you'll be doing is you'll have a text element show underneath where you want to type that value in. The challenge when that happens though is you now have your data split between 2 fields. If they chose any of the different initial values, it'll be in the pick list. If they chose other, what you actually want to do is capture that text element. So how do we reconcile this? We're going to use a third element, and that's going to do a combination of both. It's basically going to be a single element that we're able to use regardless of what options are being chosen. So let's set this up. We're going to do a pick list. We're going to do a text element, and then we're going to do a read only at the end. So let's go ahead and make this fit within the context of our health tracker. Let's go ahead and call this cheat day reason. Sometimes these happen. And then we're going to say this is an other. And then this is going to be my reporting column. Okay, let me save this very quickly, and then we're going to flesh out the rest of our form. So for my pick list, we'll go ahead and add a new list. And then once we create our list, we're going to add some values to it. We're going to say personal choice, maybe a social gathering, and then we'll put other here. I'm going to save this. You'll notice the color changes from yellow to white once it's saved. I'm going to assign this. And now we're going to default this to be empty. Doing this by setting it to -1, which is not one of our sort order values. And then finally, for the other reason, we only want this to show if our cheat reason's key value is equal to other. Now you may be wondering why I'm using the key value for my comparison here. The reason I use the key value is because this allows me to now change the order of my options inside my option list without my logic breaking. That's really the main reason. Now for the reporting reason, we're going to need to do a combination here. Again, we're going to need that if statement. So we're going to do an if else. Now let's say we have our cheat reason is equal to other. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to print the word other with a colon. And then let's have the text from my text element here. So I'm going to add in the other reason. Now, if I didn't choose other, then all that means is that we're going to print out whatever was selected here. So that's going to be ZC display key cheat reason. Let's go ahead and save this. And we'll do another sync. And then we'll see if I was able to build on the fly with no mistakes. I did a few more steps than I normally like to do before testing. Let's open up my form. And we're going to scroll straight down. We're going to go to the bottom here. We're going to say my cheat day reason. If I pick social gathering, you'll notice it shows up down there. That's good. Now let's pick other. Okay, now I have another reason I might want to type in here. Let's say too hungry. And we have a problem here. So the reporting reason is not updating. So we're going to need to go in and do a little bit of debugging here. So let's figure out what's happening under the hood. Let's first make sure other reason, cheat reason, let's make sure we're naming everything correctly. We're referencing everything correctly. So if cheat reason is equal to other, and so this is the problem right here. Okay. I'm referencing this element without the ZC display. So what this is actually going to do is return to me the sort order as opposed to the key value. If I do this, we should be good. So now I'll say if the key value is equal to other. Let's try this one more time. Sync the device, open up the form, and down here, let's choose other. Good so far. Uh-oh, we have a caching error, but things are promising. And so you'll see that reporting reason is now going to update that way. Now, if I went ahead and switched this, let's say personal choice, it'll update as well. In order to fix this right here, which you'll see is the caching error, we could always default that other reason to be empty. But for now, I think this is going to be good. This is good enough for today's webinar and for this form. All right. So now that I've gone ahead and built that, let's jump back over to these best practices and strategies. The first thing I want to remind everybody is that you want to use a text element when you're working with decimal numbers to avoid those rounding errors and maybe having an inaccuracy in your data collection and your calculations. Anytime you're working with decimals, the best practice here is to use a number or a text element. That might seem a little counterintuitive, but if you've run into that problem before, then you know what I'm talking about. When it comes to doing calculations, try your best to default those fields, especially if you're using a number field. You'll want to try to default it to 0 if necessary. For the text fields, I like to default it to being an empty string, but then you need to make sure that the number is appropriate by either using that isNaN function or using some other way of making sure that it's numeric or forcing it to be numeric. I want to highlight those new built-in functions I showed you all today, the server name, profile ID, page ID, and user ID. I know that I didn't show you any actual use cases for them currently. I do want to let you know, though, that in the form package I'm going to be sharing after this webinar, the dashboard is actually set up to segment based on your user ID. So inside the attachment link, if you go in under the hood after you import that form package, you'll see that there is a dynamic value for the user ID in the URL. Now, I do have some bad news for you all for these the dynamic values in the attachment URLs. If you're on an Android device, this is actually something that we're releasing in the next release to allow you to dynamically populate these. Currently, it's an iOS only feature. It's one of our newer features, and so we're catching up a little bit on Android. So if you have an Android device, you'll have to wait for a couple weeks, but you will be able to use this afterwards. If you're on iOS, it should work no problem. And then the final best practice here is to use a third read-only element for option lists anytime you have that other value in there. And what you're going to be able to do is send that other column to your reporting tool so that you only have one column to query and that you can build charts and graphs off of. With all that being said, I have one last poll for everybody, and this is just a quick check to see about the level of form building that I went through today. If this was too easy, absolutely let me know. If it was too hard or I went too fast, please let me know that as well. I want to make sure that I improve every single month so that the next month will be better than this month, and this month was better than last month. All right, we're going to let this go for a couple more seconds. I see the votes coming in pretty quickly. That's great. It looks like for the majority of people, we're falling in that middle ground where it was comfortable, but a good review. We're a little bit split. Some of the audience is saying it was challenging, but informative as well. Especially for that second segment, please feel free to reach out to us if you try to implement any of these techniques and run into any trouble. I can tell you that a lot of the information that I went through and the techniques I went through are also on the Customer Success Center, so you'll be able to check that out on our knowledge base and find that information yourself. But again, I'm always going to be available via email as well. All right, let me go ahead and close this poll. Stella, I wanted to check in real quick. Were there any last questions I'd be able to answer?
Yes, I did have a question about the BOGO deal.
Uh-huh.
So are we going to be sending additional information about it and how they should ask us for that information?
Yeah, real good question. So this is something that came down and that we decided on literally this morning. So we'll be sending out some more information and more details on it. If it's something that you're interested in, just send me an email and I'll be sure to take care of you. We'll just handle it that way. Otherwise, we'll have an email coming out with more details. Basically, all you'll need to do is register both people. Let us know, send us a quick note, and we'll go ahead and charge appropriately to make sure that you get that. You won't get charged for both. Okay? Any other questions?
No, everything's good.
All right, everybody. Again, I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar. Please post comments in the forum if you have any questions. If you have any recommendations for us, there's also going to be an exit survey at the end of the webinar and in the coming days. Again, this is Jonathan Sue. Stella, thanks again for hosting, and we hope to see you all next month. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.